as we close out that CARES Act funding.
So I guess to add it to like another source of money besides the latest federal money, I guess we need to figure out the rules of how restrictive the federal money is versus the CARES money, and so we can deploy the right money towards the right things. So that would be my request, is rather than just go ahead with doing a budget amendment, is that we at least understand how this money could be used differently than the ARP money.
We can get back with you on that. I think probably the CARES money for anything that you can foresee needing right now is probably the pot of money to use. And the next round of federal money from the America Recovery Plan, as we were discussing earlier, is I think we've got some ways to go before we're actually going to see that money. That's my instincts on it. So I think we'll probably be looking at CARES too, certainly to address the discussion we've just had.
Got it. So in sum, between, I think it was 330 from CARES 1, Dr. Noonan quoted, and then the 250 from kind of the latest round, that's the sum total of what the city would be allocating. Is that correct?
Well, what I was actually talking about is the 250 of CARES funds that have not been allocated. That was what was in my mind when we were talking about that. The money that goes straight to the schools, will make decisions on that on their own.
But in terms of what the city,
to your point, yes, it's actually 322 that we received from the council previously, that plus the 250. So that would be a total of what, 472? 572.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A high-level question about employee compensation, really to both of you, Dr. Noonan and Mr. Shields. Maybe Dr. Noonan could start. So if you had told me back when we set budget guidance at 2.5% that you were going to be able to present a budget which gives your employees COLA and STEP additions that are, I think, somewhere in the 4% range, I would have thought, wow, you are some kind of big-time magician. So congratulations. My question is, am I right about that, first? And second, was there something in particular unusual about this budget year that enabled you to do that? Because I know you've told us that your employee compensation is, an enormous part of your budget. People are, expensive, and I don't believe, if I'm wrong, correct me. I don't believe anybody got a raise in the current fiscal year because of COVID, right? So there's a matter of spreading out what they're getting next year over basically 2 years. I'm trying to figure out how to explain to, the average person how we put this budget together, because like I said earlier, I think it's going to be a good budget, and it's going to be able to be carried, at a tax rate that is lower, and that's good. But I want to make sure I'm explaining it the right way, and I'm, I guess, mildly concerned about what we do going forward, because sustaining, 4% salary increases is going to be a challenge unless we keep up a very vigorous campaign of economic development and benefit from inflation maybe a little bit, and generally, grow our local economy in order to keep pace with our desires to compensate our employees as competitively as we possibly can, given our size. So I don't know why it can go second on this, because the city staff is not such a big number. But Dr. Noonan, what's the answer to my questions?
Well, so first of all, I actually believe that we should be doing a step increase for all of our employees every single year, and doing some sort of cost of living adjustment as well, just to continue to grow our salary scale and remain competitive, because everybody else around us is likely doing the same thing. But you are correct that no one did get a compensation increase in this current fiscal year. We had scheduled to have a step increase plus a pretty substantial cost of living adjustment last year. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do it. So how did we do it this year? There were a couple of things that sort of broke for us that were quite positive. One was we saw some state revenues come in slightly higher than we thought they were going to be with respect to sales tax. Sales tax remained very strong in the state of Virginia, even during the pandemic, which was good. And then we also, to utilize Councilmember Lichtenhouse's words, we dug deep. We dug deep into our budget and took some backside cuts of well over $500,000 to also offset any additional cost of living adjustment that we had done. So we were able to realize that step and cost of living adjustment through some additional state revenues and some backside cuts that we took as well that we didn't think would at all interfere with the quality of educational program that we're offering here in the City of Falls Church. So we feel good about where we are. We think our employees deserve it. And so the total amount that we are looking at doing is, you're right, it's roughly 4%. It's about 2.5% in a step increase and about 1.5% in a COLA. Unfortunately, and this sort of came up prior, is that the governor came out and said that he wanted us to all do a 5% across the board adjustment within this biennium, which would mean that last year, whatever we did last year plus this year, as long as it added to 5%, then we would get some subsidy from the state to help offset some of that cost. Unfortunately, because we weren't able to give any kind of cost of living or step increase last year, the expectation was that we did all 5% in this year of the biennium, and we weren't able to get there. As hard as we tried and as magical as you think I might be with budgets, and I do want to thank Kristen Michael, who's our Chief Operating Officer, and Michelle Kopic, who's our Budget Director, for their work. We weren't able to squeeze 5% out for our employees. Now, the good news is in the final budget that was adopted at the state level, is that if you were able to get somewhere between 2 and 5%, there was some additional revenue from the state that came to help support that. So because we got to 4%, we took a prorated decrease in that 5% that we would have gotten. So we didn't fully realize all of the money that we could have gotten from the state had we done the full 5%. One commitment that I have made to our employees, and this was, and this is part of the revenue sharing agreement that we really look forward to each year, is, you set guidance, and then part of the deal is any additional revenue that falls out of the budget then would be split 50-50 between the schools and the general government. And I did make a commitment to our employees that if there was additional revenue that was realized out of the budget, that would also be poured into compensation. And we've lived by that in our own budget, and we're hopeful that in this budget, in the end, there might be some additional revenues that come from it. So that's where we are. Kristen Michael, our Chief Operating Officer, is on here. Is there anything that you wanted to add that I might have missed?
No, Dr. Noonan, I think you did a great job.
Okay, thank you. Wyatt, do you want to speak to that question at all?
I will just be brief because we will spend more time on compensation, I'm sure, when we talk about and go deeper on the general government budget in upcoming work sessions. Mm-hmm. We did set aside, in terms of budget priorities, having compensation for employees was a, kind of a starting point for the budget, just knowing what, with the freeze for this year and with the vacancies, how much work all of our employees are doing. We really felt that was crucial in the budget. And so that is something that it was also the largest single item in the budget on the general government side as well. But we'll go into more detail in terms of what other jurisdictions are doing on compensation and how we're maintaining competitiveness for our workforce, and also on how we've tried to address some of the pay equity issues just in the current fiscal year, also with some adjustments for our frontline DPW operations staff and Rec and Parks custodial staff, where we had some adjustments that we carried out this year, which we'll describe in more detail as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, looks like we've got another hand up. I'm trying to figure out whose it is. Let me just see if I can scroll down here. Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks. So the Police Review Commission had some recommendations that I think may relate to the schools. And I'm wondering if the schools had any comments about that. I think, do the schools plan to maintain the school resource officer, the SRO? And is there, and talking to one of the members of that committee, the clarity that it is important between what the police officer who's the SRO does versus school discipline. Any comments generically about the Police Review Commission suggestions, how they relate to the schools, and how we're doing?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that briefly. First and foremost, I want to thank Sevi Padilla, who was our Director of Facilities and Safety, for sitting on that committee and representing the schools. So we did have representation there, which was really good. Clark Gagnon is our current SRO at our high school, and he's certainly part of our community, and the kids know him, and he's been really excellent for us. That being said, we have an older memorandum of understanding with the police department that hasn't been revised in several years. So one of the things that Chief Gavin and I have talked about is going back and revisiting and revising as necessary the school resource officer memorandum of understanding that would incorporate some of those items that you referenced that came up with respect to that committee. I will say, having worked in schools with school resource officers as an administrator since 1999, the relationship and how that is defined and how that is documented, as you said, is very important. And we don't want to be in a position where we're deputizing, for example, a school resource officer as a school administrator, but instead the school administration leads all of our investigations and then brings in the police after. So there are really sort of two ways that it's probably much more detailed than you asked for, Mr. Snyder, and I'll stop here in a second because of the late hour, but there really are two ways that school resource officers work. Either you deputize essentially and say you're one of the school administrators, you can do whatever you want, or you say, hey, this is our school, we're the school administrators, we'll bring you in as we need you. And I think Chief Gavin and I have agreed and have always worked sort of under the premise that, and this is, I believe, the way the MOU is currently structured, that the school resource officer is there simply as a resource, but does it through a community policing opportunity. And so I would anticipate that we would land somewhere in that same place. But we do like having our school resource officer there to really help, not necessarily in moments of crisis, but is available in a moment of crisis, but really to put a face to a uniform and to help our students really understand that, in many cases, in most cases, our police are helpful. So it's nice having them there.
Okay, so I'm glad to hear there's no thought about eliminating the SRO. I think we've been reminded most recently from Boulder, Colorado, that mass shootings are still occurring. So having that school resource officer, I've always thought was critically important, but I think also important is the relationship and the function. So thanks for that discussion. Again, it was raised to me by one of our citizens who served on it as one of the important things to come out of that report, one among many. So thanks a lot for that very thorough response and the work that, others have said it, but let me just add that it's a lot of work to produce a good education system. So I thank everybody involved in that.
All right, thank you. I don't see any hands raised. Looks like there is one now. Mr. Snyder, did you raise your hand again, or is that just lingering? Looks like it might be lingering.
I just lowered it. Thank you very much, Mr.
Okay,
Mayor.
Vice Mayor Conley.
This is just a quick request, and hopefully it seems like this conversation is winding down, and I'd just like to wrap it up with a request that as the money from the federal government comes in, and as we are more aware of how it's going, that there be a working group between the schools and the general government to talk about our priorities for the allocation of that funding. We had several requests tonight in public comment that we didn't even ask for, people coming up with great ideas of how we could spend that money. So I do feel like as a team, we need to sit down and lay out some guardrails and some priorities and some goals about what we'd like to be able to do with that funding for the benefit of the whole city. So I hope that others would be interested in participating in such a group, and if staff could organize that, that'd be very good.
All right, other comments, questions? If not, I guess I want to thank all our colleagues from the school board for sticking around and speaking with us and sharing the great work that you're doing. So thank you all for coming out this evening.